They're lined up on the grid. They're ready to start.
If there's ever a game that's more deserving of a remake than Illusion Softworks' 2002 Mafia, well, at the moment it fails to come to mind. Developed by a little Czech Republic dev team that no one had even heard of, it was an open-world action-adventure game set in the 1930s. It's a game that a lot of people look back on fondly, and that's fair enough. I mean, when this thing came out, it was pretty damn advanced for the time. It had a gorgeous graphics engine, an immersive atmosphere and setting, not to mention just a really cool storyline.
Wait for us here, boys.
And a really memorable soundtrack composed by a dude who I'm not going to insult by failing at pronouncing his name.
Shut up, Paulie.
You're playing as Tommy Angelo, a cabbie in the city of Lost Heaven around the time of Prohibition who just happened to be in the wrong place at the right time. Or I don't know, the right place depending on your point of view. And then soon found himself employed by the Solari crime family.
Welcome to the family, Tommy.
Along with his two buddies Sam and Paulie, he'd carry out all manner of jobs and heists as they went head to head with the rival Morello family, alongside scoring a hot wife named Sarah before it all came crumbling down like all good crime stories should. Instead of him ending up inside an empty mansion behind a desk covered in cocaine though, it ended up with him meeting secretly with a detective in a diner to give his confession, and hopefully get his wife and kids into witness protection. It's the kind of plot that you'd see in a film, and going back and watching some of those cinematics from the old game, even now, the writing and the presentation still shines through, and when you consider that this all came out way back in 2002, that's even more impressive.
Take cover! What's going on?
However, let's not kid each other, because aside from the story and the voice acting, it's a game that's not aged particularly well. And trying to convince someone to play this thing now in 2020 is like asking someone to go mountain biking on a penny farthing. The shooting and the driving controls, for instance, aren't all that great. A lot of the game time is spent driving from one place to another, and it's also crushingly difficult, with sporadic checkpoints not really helping you that much either. So this remake, developed by Hangar 13, attempts to address all of that, whilst keeping the main elements, i.e. the story and the characters, intact. And you know what? I think it does a pretty damn good job at it.
Congratulations, big hero.
And it's just been released, completing the Mafia trilogy. Not that you'd even really know, because it kind of seems like 2K just doing a pretty average job at marketing this thing. Now, I don't think this is really aimed at people who have a fanatical love or an eidetic memory of the original. I think it's more aimed at people like myself, kind of people who played it back in the day but got turned a little bit off for all of the reasons I highlighted before. And as far back as I can remember, I've always wanted a Mafia remake, and finally, here it is. So let's see if picking this thing up is an offer you can't refuse, shall we?
Welcome to the family.
Right, so the first thing you'll probably notice is the presentation, and whilst this thing's not really going to win any awards, it does do a pretty damn good job at bringing Lost Heaven back to life. What it lacks in super high detail though, it makes up for with its art style. I mean, even the main menu is cool, just look at it. This definitive edition runs on 2K's in-house engine, the Illusion engine, which they've also used for Mafia 2 and Mafia 3, and it allows for some good looking environments and effects. You got some nice looking lighting, there's rain and water effects, not to mention really good damage modeling for vehicles and realistic looking characters. And off the back of that, and perhaps most important to mention, is that the cinematics have all been completely redone and in some cases removed, including one originally very awkward sex scene between Tommy and Sarah. Now, instead of showing two low polygonal characters grinding together, they instead go for the implication that the two of them spent the night bumping uglies, which is a lot more classier.
You got an extra blanket or something?
No. And the heat's out.
They've also extended and added in entirely new sequences as well. There's one that takes place early in the game after a mission gone bad, where Tommy comes home and talks to Sarah that does a really good job at developing their relationship a little bit more. The shootouts and action sequences look obviously better with improved gore and sound design, and it probably helps that all of these have now been motion capped, which just makes them look a lot less robotic.
This classic should do the trick.
I know it might piss off a lot of people that they didn't use the original voice actors, but I think the casting choice of these actors has also been done to coincide with their physical appearance, which has been carried across into the game, so I don't see it as a huge issue. And either way, the story itself is unchanged, which is the most important part.
Hey, I just work here.
You'll still go on that rollercoaster ride with Tommy through those moments of excitement, comedy, action, suspense, drama, and romance. You see Tommy's journey from that babe in the woods coming across this brand new way of life that sucks him right in, through to the points in the story where the whole thing starts to slowly collapse and he's dealing with deceit and betrayal, being asked to carry out jobs that bring his morality into question.
Kill these clowns!
Even though you're technically the hero of this story, Tommy's far from being a clean-cut good guy, and by the end of the campaign you'll have done some stuff that's pretty messed up. It all just makes it hit that much harder when you reach that epilogue. Yeah, the epilogue, the stuff of legend in video game writing, and one that just manages to pull at the heartstrings even more now. I mean, even though I know what's coming here, it still feels like I've been kicked in the balls with a steel cap boot when it finally happens. The gameplay's had a much needed overhaul too, with the game being modernized in a whole bunch of areas. I'm not sure if this is mechanics they've carried across from Mafia 3, and to be honest, I still haven't played that one. But either way, it goes a long way to improve how dated the original game was, and believe me, that's a good thing. If nothing else, they just actually added in a fair amount of checkpoints now, instead of spacing these out every 10 or so minutes, and really, that's all I wanted. When it comes to the vehicles, it's not like you're really driving Bugattis or Ferraris. I mean, this is the 1930s, but they do seem to drive a lot quicker now, especially in regards to acceleration. And as a result, the car chases are actually exciting now. You've got the option now of choosing from either regular or simulation driving. Regular feeling the most like the original game, I guess, and simulation meaning cars each have a unique feel, with different weights and factors like oversteer controlling how they handle. I mean, you won't be hitting a corner at full speed and pulling the handbrake up in this mode, let me put it that way. Choosing these modes is kind of like choosing easy or hard when driving though, and I had no shame in turning this down to regular during that infamous racing mission. Yeah, a mission that was originally so bad that apparently even the devs apologized for it.
Who needs Mikey Dunn? This guy is a fine replacement.
Unlike in the original game where you'd have to go back and visit Lucas and Ralphie to learn how to jack up all of these different cars, now all you've just got to do is find and break into them, then it's added to your collection.
Okay, it's car. You got it.
The radar is now a lot easier to see cops in as well, so you'll get heat a lot less often.
He's gone. Go back to patrols.
And a basic GPS system makes navigation a lot quicker, instead of having to pop up that automap every 5 seconds like you had to in the original. Like the other games, committing crimes, even something as basic as a traffic infringement, is going to attract the wrong attention. And along with the difficulty mode, you can choose just how lenient you want these guys to be. So you can make it tough or forgiving, it's really up to the player.
They giving up yet?
I don't think so.
But I think the single best mechanic they've added in here is the skip drive option. A big part of what made the original game often so boring to sit through in between the main parts of missions was that you honestly spent more time driving to your next objective than actually completing it. There was nothing of note during most of these either, just you making that commute to the next point of interest in a car that often went about as fast as a fucking Zamboni. What they've added in now is the option to skip this drive entirely, and it just fast travels you to your next objective. This is entirely optional, obviously, and I don't recommend doing it right away, because you're going to miss out on a lot of the new dialogue between characters that happens during the car ride. It's got that whole GTA vibe to it, where the characters banter with each other, which is kind of fun to listen to.
Well, if it don't go fine, try not to let him see your face.
And it also helps in establishing the relationship and the rapport between the main cast. Not to mention the inclusion of the radio now with licensed music and news broadcasts.
It would seem the best thing to do on a night like this is to stay at home with your loved ones and keep warm and dry.
I don't know, man, it's just a simple quality of life inclusion that makes the game so much less irritating to get through, and just removes that absolute slog of driving an early 1930s hunk of junk that handles like a Sherman tank on an ice rink.
Boom!
The open world is really just window dressing for the story anyway, so I don't see an issue with skipping out on the driving aspect when most of the time it's just filler. There's not a whole heap of side content to see here anyway, outside of collecting comic books and cards. Paulie's not going to be calling you up asking you to go out to play darts or bowling, let's put it that way.
Really?
Shooting is another one of the biggest aspects that's been improved, thank God. The original game was a third-person shooter, but not one that did a fantastic job at it, and even for its time. I mean, there's far better third-person shooters from around that same time period, like one that starts with M and ends in Axe Payne. How it worked was that you crouched, peeked around corners and popped off a couple of shots at someone, then said your Hail Marys and hoped your bullets would find their mark. Now, keeping in line with the other recent games in the series, the Definitive Edition includes a cover mechanic. So you pop into cover, wait for enemies to stick their heads out, then put them out of their misery. There's revolvers, pistols, shotguns, and the old drum-fed Tommy gun, a goddamn classic. Though this time, it's about as accurate as spitting pumpkin seeds at someone, which I guess isn't entirely inaccurate. I mean, it is my understanding that those things were chosen more for their bullet capacity than ability to hit what you're aiming at. There's a bolt-action rifle too, and along with alcohol during Prohibition, you'd think ammo for this thing has also been outlawed. Shotguns aren't all that great either, and they lose their accuracy and damage exponentially the further someone is away from you, to the point that you'd be better off using harsh language than trying to shoot someone. So, like the original game, it seems revolvers and pistols are still the way to go, and a well-placed headshot puts any wise guy wannabe out of his misery pretty quickly. If you remember the melee combat in the original, it was really just a matter of pulling out a baseball bat or a knuckle duster and just hoping for the best. Well, now there's a basic dodge system, which is kind of idiot-proof. And I do want to say too, I think it's nice how the enemies wait for their turn to try and punch Tommy, instead of all ganging up on him. You even get some nice finishing moves when someone's low on health. Now, this is admittedly pretty janky, and it kind of feels like a combat system from a decade ago. A few times I saw enemies clip right through the walls when I'd knock them out, but look, I'll take this system any day of the damn week over that mess from the original game. And also, finally, they've actually included some basic stealth mechanics. Aside from using cover to stay out of sight, you can also sneak around to make less noise, along with taking someone out silently from behind.
There's so far the feds are handing over.
So that dog shit mission where you're sneaking into that villa with the safecracker can now be completed in a reasonable amount of time, without forcing so many restarts that it starts to seem like Groundhog Day. And I think the best bit about most of this is that it lets you control all of this stuff yourself. I mean, if you still want the cops to pull you over for speeding or running red lights, you have that option. And the difficulty options has a mode called Classic Difficulty. Along with making the shooting tougher, this difficulty mode also includes a bunch of features meant to make the game feel more like its 2002 counterpart. So ultimately, it's kinda hard to fault the new inclusions, especially when you're given a fair bit of ways to customize it for your own personal preference. This does also carry across to the structure of missions as well, and you don't even need to look all that much further than the first couple to see how things have been greatly improved for the better. One of the opening missions where you're going around as Tommy as a cab driver. I mean, originally this thing goes on for like 15 or 20 minutes, having you drive around town picking up these mundane fares. This was obviously done as a means to kind of acclimate you to the layout of the city, even though that's not entirely necessary because of the auto map. And I guess it was also kind of done to highlight just how boring Tommy's life is before he joins up with the crime family. But holy shit, man, this mission alone was enough to turn anyone off the game just right off the bat. So now in the remake, aside from the driving just being a whole lot less tedious due to the improved vehicle handling, they've also reduced the amount of fares you need to take to complete this mission from I think 5 down to 3.
Sure is.
After this too, you're attacked by those two assholes from the Morello family and then have to run down a bunch of alleys to escape them. Oh sorry, spoiler. This part's also a lot improved, because now you don't have to rely on that RNG for not getting shot in the ass. And why they ever thought it was a good idea to make such an early mission so easily failable, it's just beyond me.
Sure is.
Some people might not enjoy the way certain missions have been trimmed down though, which is fair enough. Like, unless I somehow managed to miss all of these, it seems those side objectives for Lucas have been taken out entirely. These were side missions where you'd carry out some kind of objective for him, then he'd show you how to break into and steal certain cars. I mean, I don't think it's a huge omission considering it really didn't have a huge impact on the overall story, but it's one aspect of removal that the hardcore fans of the original would be justified in being annoyed at.
Great, thanks.
There's a few other minor issues with the game as well, like I noticed a few physics glitches where bodies would react in odd ways during combat, something that definitely wasn't supposed to happen. During one sequence, enemies that I guess were supposed to attack me instead turned into pacifists and just stood there. But man, I really have to scratch my brain to think of outright faults I came across, and I never encountered anything outright game-breaking, or the kind of thing that had caused me to head over to the Steam forums and have a cry about it.
You boys clear on everything?
So, as a fair-weather Mafia fan, Mafia Definitive Edition is kind of hard to fault. Like I said, I can understand how it might annoy some of the purists and how some of the stuff has been changed or removed, but I never felt like any of this has been done at the expense of the overall experience. At the end of the day, this is a game about Tommy Angelo and his escapades with the Salieri crime family. Those key moments and sequences have all been kept intact, and that's really all that matters. The original Mafia to me was a cinematic game that happened to have some challenging and crushing gameplay on top of it. The remakes tried to focus more on the cinematic aspect and then let the player tailor how challenging they want the gameplay to be, instead of conforming to the developer's idea of a challenge. The quality of life improvements completely fix all of the issues I had with the original game, which means overall I have no dramas recommending this thing to anyone who likes shooting wise guys, swilling hooch and avoiding income tax.
My dick.
And that is an offer that's hard to refuse.